Linda turned on the bathroom tap and nothing came out. She tried again. Still dry. But her water bill said she used 3,000 gallons last month. At first, she blamed the plumbing. Then, she started listening deeper. Because sometimes, in a home, what isn't working is trying to tell you something. She wasn't into Feng Shui. She believed in God. But the more her house started acting strange, dripping, leaking, going still, the more it started to feel like a mirror. And maybe you felt that too. A sink that smells even when it's clean. A leak that comes back no matter how many times you fix it. A bathroom that feels heavier than it should. In the Bible, water is never just water. It flooded the earth. It poured over Jesus in the Jordan. It healed the blind. It revealed the soul. And in Feng Shui, water holds energy. It tells the story your walls won't say out loud. This is Linda's journey. But if you've ever ignored a slow drip or avoided the kitchen sink, it might be yours too. Welcome to Wisdom of Feng Shui. And if something stirs inside you today, leave an icon water in the comments and let this light keep finding you. Let's start where it all began, with a watering can Linda hadn't touched in weeks. There was something about that watering can, not the dust, not the way the handle had cracked, but the fact that it was still full, sitting on the back porch of Linda's house in Kentucky for over 2 weeks now, untouched. She used to water the plants every morning before work. Now, she barely noticed them. The water in that can didn't just sit still. It started to smell, like something alive had given up. One afternoon, her neighbor Mrs. Ellis, the kind that talked with her eyes more than her mouth, walked by and glanced at the porch. She paused, looked down at the can, then up at Linda and said, half joking, half not, "Your house feels like it's holding its breath, honey." Linda smiled politely, but inside something tightened. She hadn't realized it until that moment. She'd stopped letting anything move, not just water, emotions, faith, conversation. The whole place had gone quiet, not peaceful quiet, but the kind that makes even silence sound heavy. Why did the house feel heavier when everything inside it was still? Later that week, while rinsing a mug in the kitchen, she noticed the sink was draining slower than usual. The smell of old pipe mold drifted up. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't flood. It didn't break. It just refused to flow. She stared at it, then whispered to herself without meaning to, "Is this what I've become too?" It wasn't the plumbing. It was something else. The same way a still pond gathers mosquitoes, her heart had been gathering fear, reluctance, grief, not the loud kind, the kind that pretends to function but avoids anything that moves too fast. Even prayer. She believed in God, she just didn't want to disturb him lately. Not out of rebellion, but out of guilt. In Feng Shui, stagnant water represents dead Kai energy that refuses to circulate. It creates physical dampness, emotional resistance, and in some traditions, even draws in illness or spiritual confusion. The Bible has its own warning for this. "They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns that hold no water." Jeremiah 2:13, a life that looks full, but can't pour. Linda's watering can was exactly that. She hadn't poured into anything lately, not her son, not herself, not her own home. And that energy, it started showing up in the walls. That night, her son Brady knocked on the bathroom door and said, "Mom, why does it always smell weird in here now?" Linda paused mid-toothbrush, stared at the barely used guest bathroom sink, and for the first time in months, turned the faucet on. It coughed, then trickled. The sound was strangely loud, like something breathing for the first time after being held down. She thought of something Pastor Joel said once during a casual chat at the Sunday service. If the soul doesn't flow, it'll eventually rot like water that stands too long. She laughed politely then, but now it didn't feel like a metaphor. What are you still holding that's gone stale? What in your home have you let stand still, not because it's broken, but because you no longer know how to move with it? Linda walked back to the porch the next morning and looked at the watering can. The water inside was murky now. She picked it up, heavier than she remembered, and walked it to the edge of her yard. She didn't dump it angrily. She poured it slowly. It felt like letting something go, even if she couldn't name it. The next day, she cleaned the can, filled it with fresh water, and set it back down. She didn't water the plants yet, but she would. That was enough for now. Ritual tip: walk through your home today and check every water source you haven't touched in a while, a guest sink, a mop bucket, a vase in the corner. Flush it, run it, refresh it, let the old water go. And as you do, say this softly: "Wash me, Lord, and let me flow again." Even in stillness, the soul is meant to move, and not all loss comes from chaos. Some comes quietly, drop by drop, like in the mistake Linda faced next. Linda didn't notice it at first, just a soft drip in the middle of the night, the kind that's easy to ignore until you hear it between your thoughts. At 2:17 a.m., she woke up again, not because of a bad dream, not because of her son, but because the sound had gotten under her skin. Drip, pause, drip, pause. It was the kitchen sink this time, or maybe the upstairs bathroom. She couldn't tell. It didn't matter. The sound wasn't loud. It was precise, almost intentional. By the fourth night, Linda wrapped a dish towel around the faucet head to muffle the sound. It didn't work. The drip had a rhythm now, like a pulse she didn't want to feel. On Sunday, she stood with Brady at the kitchen table, pouring him cereal when he said offhandedly, "Mom, is the house sad?" She blinked. "Why do you say that?" Because it keeps crying." It hit her harder than she expected. She kept the house clean, paid the bills, showed up. But somehow everything felt like it was leaking. Not just the faucet, her energy, her patience, her joy. The kind of slow loss that doesn't scream, it just drains. And sometimes, draining hurts more than breaking. You don't know when it started, you only know you're tired. Tired and not sure why. Feng Shui teaches that water leaks are more than physical problems. They're signs of energy bleeding out of your life. Dripping water, especially when unnoticed or unattended, is symbolic of lost wealth, lost vitality, and spiritual fatigue. It's energy leaving through places you've stopped caring for. And in scripture, leaks show up too in quieter, more devastating forms. Isaiah 1:6 says, "Wounds not closed, nor bound up, nor soothed with oil." The wounds in your home might not be dramatic, but they exist. And like emotional wounds, they don't close themselves. They must be noticed, acknowledged, tended to. Linda tried to fix it herself, tightened the handle, replaced a washer she watched a YouTube video about. It helped for 2 days. Then the drip came back. And this time, she realized it wasn't about the pipe. It was about the permission she kept giving life to chip away at her. Slowly, quietly, while pretending everything was fine. How many of us walk around leaking peace without knowing it? She remembered something her mother used to say when Linda was a teen. Not everything broken will burst. Some things just bleed, one drop at a time. Back then, it sounded poetic. Now it felt true. Linda sat at the table that night, listening to the faucet again. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She just looked at it, really looked, and thought, what else in my life have I been patching instead of healing? She called Pastor Joel the next morning, not to confess, just to talk. He came over with his usual travel mug of weak coffee and his toolkit, fixed the faucet, then said something strange before leaving. You don't have to leak to prove you're still soft. Let God hold what you can't. She didn't say anything back, but she noticed something later that night. The silence felt clean. What is leaking from your home while you're busy holding everything else together? Where in your life are you tolerating the drip instead of sealing the source? Ritual tip: check every faucet in your home. Don't just listen for sound, feel for it. Wipe the base. Test the handles. If it's dripping, fix it. And while doing so, say this prayer out loud. Lord, help me close what needs closing and heal what I've left unattended. Even silent leaks create floods over time. And in some homes, like Linda's, the water doesn't just leak. Sometimes it mixes with things it shouldn't. And that's when energy turns from wounded to confused. It started with a smell Linda couldn't quite place. Not bad exactly, just wrong. Like cleaning spray over mildew or air freshener trying too hard. It came from the hallway, the stretch between the guest bathroom and the kitchen. At first, she assumed it was the trash, then the pipes, then maybe something under the floor, but nothing ever showed up. Until one morning, while wiping down the counter, she noticed something odd. The same water line that supplied the guest bathroom was connected to the line under her sink. She wouldn't have known that, except Pastor Joel, who'd recently helped fix her leaky faucet, had pointed it out in passing. It's not dangerous, he'd said, just unusual, not ideal, especially when sacred spaces get too close to waste lines. That sentence lingered longer than it should have. Sacred spaces, waste lines. Linda wasn't sure what counted as sacred anymore. Her kitchen used to feel like that. So did her hallway, where she had a small framed quote, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." But lately, the energy felt off, like two kinds of spirit clashing just beneath the surface. How do you pray in a house where the clean keeps touching the unclean? How do you bless a space where the plumbing confuses itself? Feng Shui teaches that when clean and dirty water lines cross too closely, energy fields become muddled. Purity loses clarity. Intentions blur. It may sound symbolic, but it shows up in mood, sleep quality, even in decision-making. You might feel pulled in too many directions, or unable to rest in your own rituals. And spiritually, it's echoed in James 3:11, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring. The verse isn't just about water. It's about what happens when your spirit starts speaking both faith and fear in the same breath. That night, Linda sat at the kitchen table, staring across the hallway to the closed bathroom door. The same door her son Brady had started avoiding. "It feels gross in there," he'd muttered once. And now, as she sat holding a cup of tea she didn't want, she caught herself thinking something she hadn't dared admit. What if this house is confused because I am? She used to light a candle and pray in the corner by the window, a small altar space with a Bible, a cross, and a plant. But lately, she'd moved it closer to the laundry area for convenience. After all, it got better light there. But now, the prayers felt hollow, like they bounced off lint and detergent bottles instead of rising upward. She glanced around her home, noticing for the first time how many things were bleeding into each other. Work stuff near the dinner table, unopened mail next to her bedside Bible, a trash can only 2 feet from her prayer space. It wasn't just clutter. It was spiritual confusion disguised as convenience. What parts of your life have you allowed to overlap that should? Where have you placed your sacred too close to your discarded? The next morning, Linda moved her altar, not back to where it was, somewhere new, clearer, quieter. She put a bowl of clean water beside the candle and whispered, "This space belongs to peace now, not leftovers." It didn't fix the plumbing, but that evening, when she walked past the hallway, she noticed the air smelled like nothing at all. And that, somehow, was a blessing. A gesture for the spirit. Walk through your home with fresh eyes. Look not just for dirt, but for confusion. Ask yourself, would I pray here? If the answer is no, cleanse the area with water and intention. Separate the sacred from the spent, and say quietly, let what's holy remain whole. Purity isn't perfection, it's alignment. And when things are mixed too long, even blessing starts to taste diluted. But sometimes the confusion isn't external. Sometimes it's what we pour and pour and pour without pause. Linda had started showering twice a day, sometimes 3. It wasn't about cleanliness, not really. It was the heat, the sound, the steam, the feeling of being covered in something she could rinse away. She told herself it helped her relax after the night shift, that it cleared her head. But the truth was quieter. The shower was the only place she could cry without anyone hearing. And she didn't even cry much, just that kind of tight feeling behind the eyes, like pressure waiting to break but never given permission. Brady once asked her why the water bill was so high. She mumbled something about laundry, but even she was surprised when she read the meter. It wasn't just the shower. It was the constant running of the tap while cleaning, the dishwasher going twice a day even when half full, the garden hose left dripping after she watered a patch of dead grass. There was water everywhere, moving, rushing, distracting, and yet she still didn't feel clean. What are we really trying to wash when we scrub things that are already spotless? What ache are we hiding behind the comfort of warm water? For Linda, it was shame, not the loud kind. The quiet, private kind that comes from letting life slip, from feeling stuck in survival mode while pretending everything's under control. She didn't talk about it, but her rituals told the truth. Water had become her confessional, not prayer, not silence. Just the shower, the sink, the mop bucket, always moving, never still. Feng Shui sees excess water as ungrounded energy, emotional overflow without direction. Just like a flood, it may feel powerful at first, until it drowns everything in its path. In a spiritual sense, overuse of water reflects the soul's desperate need to feel something, to feel pure, safe, seen. But the more you scrub, the less you actually let go. Because water doesn't heal unless it's intentional. Even in the Bible, water was a force of both life and destruction. The Great Flood came when humanity overflowed with brokenness. And God didn't stop the water by cleaning, He stopped it by starting over. That story is less about rain and more about release. Linda hadn't started over, she just kept rinsing. One night, after her third shower in 24 hours, she sat on the bathroom floor wrapped in a towel, staring at the fogged-up mirror. Something about the stillness hit different. She hadn't been still in weeks, maybe months. And for the first time, she wondered, if I stopped washing everything around me, would I be forced to feel what's inside? That thought scared her more than she expected. She remembered how Pastor Joel once said, "You don't need to be spotless to be seen by God." And Mrs. Ellis, always observing, had quietly left a note on Linda's porch the week before. No explanation, just a Bible verse handwritten, Be still and know that I am God. She hadn't read it closely until now. How much of your cleaning is actually coping? How many gallons of water are you using to avoid the weight of what's really there? A practice for awareness. Tomorrow, limit yourself to a single moment with water. 1. A mindful shower. 1 sink of warm water to wash the dishes, slow and present. No rushing, no overuse. And when you touch the water, breathe, then whisper, I am already clean enough to be loved. We drown when we forget how to float. But when water is used with peace, it becomes sacred again. And sometimes, peace doesn't arrive as stillness. Sometimes it knocks on. The first time it rained after the drought, Linda didn't even look up. She was wiping down the counters, half listening to Brady complain about math homework when a soft rattling hit the window. It had been months since they'd had real rain in Kentucky, but she didn't move. She didn't open the curtains. She just kept scrubbing a spotless stovetop as if a few drops on the glass had nothing to say. But that night, the gutters overflowed, and Brady asked before bed, Mom, is God crying? Linda didn't answer him, not because she didn't believe, but because she wasn't sure if she was ready to listen. Rain used to mean something to her. It was her mom's favorite weather. When Linda was little, they'd sit on the porch with tea and just watch it fall, no phones, no noise, just the hush that rain brings. Her mother used to say, if you listen close, rain has instructions. But somewhere between night shifts and bills and laundry, Linda stopped listening. Not just to the rain, but to everything gentle, everything slow. In Feng Shui, rain is considered heaven's kai, a spiritual cleansing that comes uninvited but never without purpose. It brings movement to stagnant spaces, softens hardened energy, and signals a turning point in flow. And in Scripture, rain is far more than weather. It's a metaphor for mercy, presence, sometimes even warning. Hosea 6:3 says, He will come to us like the rain. Not like thunder, not like fire, like rain, soft, steady, sometimes unnoticed. That verse sat in Linda's mind for days, not because she read it in her Bible, but because Pastor Joel had quietly texted it to her the night it poured. No message, no explanation, just the verse. She left it unread for hours, then opened it, then stared out the window, listening to the drip of rain off the porch roof. She felt unsettled, not scared, but like something was being asked of her and she wasn't sure what. When did we decide that rain is an inconvenience instead of an invitation? How often do we close the blinds on something heaven is trying to pour into us? Linda began to notice things. How the plants in the front yard perked up after the storm. How the house smelled fresher the morning after. How Brady slept more soundly on rainy nights. And how her own body seemed to exhale just a little when the wind carried water through the trees. She didn't change overnight, but the next time it rained, she did something small. She opened the back door, left it ajar just enough to let the scent in, then she stepped out barefoot just to feel the water touch her toes. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. A private gesture of surrender, an invitation for reverence. The next time rain finds your home, don't shut it out. Don't rush past it. Pause, stand near a window, let your hand touch the glass, or better, let the air touch your skin. Close your eyes and whisper, if this is you speaking, I am here. Let it fall. Because rain doesn't need to roar to be divine. Sometimes, it's the softness that carries the loudest truth. And while heaven often speaks in water, it also watches what we choose to keep, especially the things that should have been emptied long ago. The bucket had been there since summer. Tucked beside the dryer, next to a broom no one used, a faded towel draped over the top. Linda didn't even remember why she filled it in the first place, maybe for mopping, maybe to soak something. But now the water inside was gray, filmy, with specks floating on the surface. When she finally lifted the towel one morning, she winced. Not from the smell, but from the realization this had been in her home for weeks, festering, quietly ignored, and somehow she'd walked past it every day. There's a strange kind of blindness that happens with familiarity. You stop seeing things just because they've always been there. A stained wall, a blinking light, a half-full bucket of used water. But just because something's common doesn't mean it's clean. And just because it's been in your house long enough to become background doesn't mean it hasn't been affecting you. Feng Shui teaches that water holds memory, not metaphorically, literally. In still bodies of water, energy stagnates, especially when the water is no longer clean. It becomes a physical symbol of emotional buildup. Resentment, regret, old thoughts that never drained. And in biblical terms, it's even more stark. In Psalm 51:2, David cries out, "Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." The psalm isn't about physical dirt. It's about internal rot and the desperate need to be emptied before you can be filled. Linda stared at the bucket longer than she meant to, and something about it began to feel personal. She hadn't let herself grieve certain things, not her marriage, not the friendships that faded after the divorce, not even the woman she used to be before motherhood became a blur of routines. That water had been sitting, but so had parts of her. She thought of the time Brady spilled juice on the floor and tried to clean it with a dry rag, smearing it everywhere. "Sometimes you need water to clean water," she had told him. But now she wondered, how many of us are trying to clean emotional messes with tools that are already soaked in pain? How many of us are trying to heal with hearts we haven't rinsed in years? The next morning, while cleaning the laundry area, Linda finally picked up the bucket. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was holding more than water. She carried it outside and poured it along the fence line, far from the plants. She didn't speak, but in her chest there was a whisper. You don't need to keep what tried to serve you but turned into something else. A quiet act of release. Walk through your home and find the places where used water has lingered. A vase, a mop bucket, a humidifier basin. Ask yourself, what am I holding that's past its purpose? Empty it, rinse it, then say slowly, I am not a container for what no longer cleanses. Because water only blesses when it's moving. And when we hold what should have been poured out, it blesses no one. And still, even after we empty what's stale, some of us forget to invite water back in, to honor it, to let it stand as a sign of presence, not just cleaning, but connection. There was no bowl, no glass, no jar of water by the door or on the nightstand or anywhere that said, "This space is being watched over." Linda didn't grow up with altars. She wasn't raised to set bowls of water near candles or write down prayers in corners of rooms. But lately, she'd begun to notice something missing, not in function, but in feeling. Her home was clean, quiet, even organized now, but it still felt unanchored, like the energy came and went without staying. And what is a home that's been emptied if it hasn't also been filled again? She thought back to Pastor Joel's visit weeks ago. After fixing the faucet, he paused in her entryway, eyes soft, voice lower than usual. "You've cleared out a lot of heaviness," he said, "but have you asked peace to stay?" It had sounded abstract at the time, But now, walking from room to room, she understood exactly what he meant. It's one thing to remove what no longer serves. It's another to prepare a place for what should. In Feng Shui, bowls of water, especially when placed with intention, serve as energetic beacons. They invite clarity, reflection, and spiritual awareness, not to worship the object, but to recognize the flow, to give the invisible a place to sit. It's less about ritual and more about recognition, less superstition, more posture. And in the Bible, the image of water is consistently tied to the presence of the Spirit. In John 7:38, Jesus says, "Whoever believes in me, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Not beside them, not near them. From within, but Linda had stopped flowing. And her home, while cleaner, still felt dry in a way she couldn't quite name. Until one evening, just before sunset, she stepped into the quiet living room and felt it. The absence. Not of furniture, not of sound, but of focus. There was no space set aside that said, "This is where I return to myself." The whole house had been doing, cleaning, fixing, moving, but not being. She grabbed a clear glass from the cupboard, filled it with water from the kitchen sink, set it gently on the windowsill where the light still touched, then added a small rosemary sprig from outside. No candles, no recited verse, just still water, placed with quiet hands. She stood in front of it for a moment, let the air settle, then whispered, "Flow here and stay." A devotion to placement. Choose one spot in your home, near light, near peace, near where you rest or begin your day. Place a clean bowl or glass of water there. No need to explain it, just honor it. And each time you pass it, let it remind you, presence doesn't barge in, it waits to be welcomed. Because in the end, it's not just about removing bad energy or fixing what's broken. It's about remembering what you want to live with and living like it's already here. Linda didn't build an altar because she was religious. She built one because she was ready. And that is where healing becomes habitation. Linda didn't change her life all at once. There was no dramatic moment, no voice from the ceiling, just water doing what water does. Dripping, sitting, flowing, waiting. She started noticing the way her home responded when she did small things differently. A faucet that stopped leaking. A plant that started reaching toward the light. The way her son's voice softened after a quiet evening rain. It wasn't the plumbing that had been broken. It was her connection to the invisible. What she learned wasn't complicated, but it was sacred. Water carries messages, some loud, some too quiet to hear unless you stand still long enough. It reflects you, cleanses you, sometimes even convicts you. And in the spaces we often ignore, the bucket, the shower, the cup by the window, something greater is always speaking. Because water was never just for cleaning. It parted seas. It healed eyes. It stood still for prophets and flowed for sinners. And in Linda's home, it whispered truth where no one else was listening. It told her where the energy stopped and where spirit was ready to start again. So maybe it's not about chasing signs. Maybe it's about creating space for them. Maybe your sink, your tub, your porch in the rain, they're not just ordinary. They're altars you forgot were altars. Places where something sacred has always been pouring, patiently, waiting for you to notice. Thank you for walking this quiet story with us. Sometimes, the deepest healing doesn't shout. It just drips gently until you begin to feel the difference. Your space speaks. Wisdom listens.